Hello, everyone, and welcome to this World Health Organization virtual press conference on October 6th, 2021. My name is Carla Drysdale, and I'm a communications officer at WHO, headquartered in Geneva. Today's press conference focuses on the Global Advisory Body's review of evidence for the RTS malaria vaccine. The two bodies are the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts of Immunization, or SAGE, and the WHO Malaria Policy Advisory Committee, or MPAG. Their review of the full package of RTSS evidence informs a potential WHO recommendation for the wider use of this vaccine. Joining Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, WHO's Director General today, are Dr. Shidi Moeti, WHO Regional Director for Africa, Dr. Alejandro Craviato, Chair of WHO's SAGE, Professor Diane Worth, Chair of WHO's MPAG, and online, actually in the room, I think we have Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, WHO Chief Scientist. Also joining today and available to respond to any technical questions during the Q&A session for journalists are Dr. Pedro Alonso, Director, WHO Global Malaria Program, Dr. Kate O'Brien, Director of the WHO Immunization, Vaccines, and Biologicals Department, as well as Dr. Mary Hamill, Senior Technical Officer, Malaria Vaccine Implementation Program, and Dr. David Schellenberg, Scientific Advisor for the Global Malaria Program. Speakers will first give their remarks and then we'll begin the Q&A with journalists. When we open the floor to the media Q&A, please enter your name and media outlet. And to ask a question, please click Raise Hand. And when you're called upon, of course, don't forget to unmute. And please, only one question per journalist. And a reminder that as this is a press conference related to RTSS, please keep your questions related to malaria and the RTSS vaccine. If you have questions about COVID-19, you can ask them in our presser tomorrow. So with that, I will now give the floor to Dr. Tedros. The floor is yours, Dr. Tedros.
Thank you, Carla. Dear colleagues and friends, as some of you may know, I started my career as a malaria researcher, and I longed for the day that we would have an effective vaccine against this ancient and terrible disease. And today is that day, an historic day. Today, WHO is recommending the broad use of the world's first malaria vaccine. This recommendation is based on results from an ongoing pilot program in Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi that has reached more than 800,000 children since 2019. This long-awaited malaria vaccine is a breakthrough for science, child health, and malaria control. Using this vaccine in addition to existing tools to prevent malaria could save tens of thousands of young lives each year. We have made incredible progress in the fight against malaria in the past 2 decades. Since 2000, malaria deaths have fallen by more than half, and we have succeeded in eliminating malaria from many parts of the world. But globally, progress has stalled at an unacceptably high level, with more than 200 million cases and 400,000 deaths every year. 2/3 of those deaths are children under 5 in Africa. WHO has said consistently that we need new tools to get malaria control back on track. 2 years ago, WHO and our partners began a pilot program to roll out this vaccine in Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi. Here is what we have learned. This vaccine can be delivered through child health clinics by ministries of health and readily reach children at high coverage levels. Community demand for the vaccine is strong. It has broad reach to children, including the most vulnerable, who may not use a bed net, thereby expanding access to preventive measures to children at risk. It is safe. It significantly reduces life-threatening severe malaria, and we estimate it to be highly cost-effective. This is a powerful new tool, but like COVID-19 vaccines, it's not the only tool. Vaccination against malaria does not replace or reduce the need for other measures, including bed nets or seeking care for fever. Of course, the key to any public health endeavor of this size and scope is partnership. I thank the children, families, and communities who have participated in this historic pilot program. I thank the Ministries of Health of Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi for their leadership in embarking on these pilot programs, which have continued despite COVID-19. I thank the researchers in Africa who generated the data and insights that informed this decision. This is a vaccine developed in Africa by African scientists, and we're very proud. I thank GlaxoSmithKline and many research partners for creating the vaccine and PAS for bringing it from discovery through development with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I thank Gavi, the Global Fund, and UNITAID, who funded the pilot programs and the evaluations. Malaria has been with us for millennia, and the dream of a malaria vaccine has been a long-held but unattainable dream. Today, the RTSS malaria vaccine, more than 30 years in the making, changes the course of public health history. We still have a very long road to travel, but this is a long stride down that road. This vaccine is a gift to the world, but its value will be felt most in Africa because that's where the burden of malaria is greatest. It's now my pleasure to welcome my sister and colleague, Dr. Shidi Moeti, WHO's Regional Director for Africa, to talk about the difference this vaccine will make on the continent. Dr. Moeti, you have the floor.
Very much, Dr. Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros. I'd like in my turn to warmly greet my fellow speakers and also to say hello to our colleagues in the media and at WHO. I and my colleagues in WHO in Africa are beyond delighted that after decades of action on malaria, there's finally a vaccine that can reduce cases, particularly of life-threatening severe malaria among young children. For centuries, malaria has stalked sub-Saharan Africa, causing immense personal suffering. As it stands today, the African region, as the Director General has already said, accounts for 94% of the global malaria burden. Every year, hundreds of millions of people fall ill and hundreds of thousands die, sadly, due to this preventable and treatable disease. Every 2 minutes, a child under 5 dies of malaria. This indirectly impacts on African families, societies, and economies, and the indirect impacts are enormous. We've long hoped for an effective malaria vaccine, and now for the first time ever, we have such a vaccine recommended for widespread use. Today's recommendation therefore offers a glimmer of hope for the continent. We expect many more African children will be protected from malaria and grow into healthy and productive adults. I'd like, in my turn, to commend Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi for leading the pilot program for the RTSS vaccine. I'd like to give a shout out, too, to the caregivers who brought children to be vaccinated, recognizing the ever-present threat of malaria, even as societies battled the COVID-19 pandemic. To take forward this recommendation, the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, convened by WHO, will support national authorities to fast-track the regulatory approvals to introduce this vaccine in the countries where it is needed. This is an excellent opportunity, too, to explore production on the continent of a vaccine that will benefit generations of Africans. The RTSS vaccine is a game changer, and it's arriving at the right time. Progress in reducing the malaria burden in Africa has stalled in recent years, and innovative tools and approaches are urgently needed to get the global malaria control effort back on track. In the African region, we've already started a consultative process of rethinking malaria to look at the barriers to progress and how to overcome them. With the RTSS vaccine and other anticipated changes in the malaria business model, we expect to see greater impacts on the malaria burden in Africa in the very near future. It's clear that more investment is needed in strengthening service delivery platforms to make sure that malaria tools reach at-risk groups. Children are among the vulnerable groups being missed by key interventions, and so equity-focused investments are crucial. The same kind of political leadership, multi-sectoral action, and community engagement that we've seen in response to COVID-19 will be vital to drive action to save lives and prevent ill health from malaria. Together, we should accelerate action towards a future free from malaria, and the RTSS vaccine, as part of a comprehensive set of actions, can help us to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Shidi. WHO's recommendation is based on the advice of two advisory groups: the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization, or SAGE, and the WHO Malaria Policy Advisory Group, or MPAG. Their advice was formulated based on a detailed review of the evidence carried out by the SAGE MPAG Working Group, chaired by Dr. Peter Smith. First, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Alejandro Cravioto, Chair of SAGE. Dr. Cravioto, you have the floor.
It's okay? Just one. Finally got it. Dr. Tedros, thank you very much, and happy to be here with you. As was said, the advisory group of experts on immunization that the WHO convenes is a group of 15 members from around the world who review and assess evidence regarding vaccines, immunizations, and especially the delivery of these products and the linkages with other health interventions. So in that sense, the work that we have been doing over the past months to see how the evidence gathered from these three studies in Africa in the second phase of the testing of the RTSS AS01 vaccine have been extremely important for us in our ability then to be able to come today and have a final discussion and be able to make recommendations about its use. I would like to stress two things which are different in the case of this vaccine. One, that before these pilot studies in Africa were started, we worked together with the Global Malaria Program to be able to have a framework for policy decision that allowed us to have all the information that we needed for the group to gather before the end of the studies, and for us to be able then to have the capacity to be able to review that information and be able to make recommendations. This was based on previous experience in which we didn't have this information, and that made our task more difficult in the sense of coming to decisions. The second thing I would like to stress is that although it is very sad to see children dying of any disease, malaria included, the ones who survive are the ones that should worry us the most. Anything that we can do to curb the amount of infection in a growing child means that that child is going to have a higher altitude, be taller, and also be smarter. And I think those are things that we tend to forget sometimes when we decide on interventions, and especially on the cost of these interventions. I think that the experience we have had before with other infections showed us clearly that a child that is repeatedly sick is maimed for life. And that means that he or she is not capable of developing the capacities that he or she is born with, in the sense of achieving an adulthood that will be meaningful for him or her and their community. So in that sense, having anything that protects them or helps them to be less sick during this growth phase is essential for us as a community, in the sense of having a much better group of people that can really help us change the coming world. When we talk about climate change, when we talk about other issues, it is without thinking that the main factor, which are human beings involved in that, need also to be protected with any and everything that we have available. Therefore, the decision that we came on today, which is based on the evidence gathered in these 3 pilot studies, is essential for us to do 3 things. One, we can declare that the vaccine is safe and that the safety issues that came out of the initial trial have been resolved satisfactorily and thoroughly, to be able to say that we don't have any worries about that. And second, that the vaccine does protect people against a severe disease such as malaria, and especially the more severe types of malaria in that sense. Furthermore, I think we have the capacity to be able to increase the use of this vaccine now that it has been reached at this level. And in that sense, I think we should all be congratulated in the sense of having been able to do the work and now to come back and saying that we can follow and have a new face of these things. I would like to join Dr. Tedros, Dr. Moti, and my co-chair, Dr. Worth, in celebrating the achievements today, and especially in thanking everybody that has been involved both in the development and the testing of this vaccine. And I would also like to thank all the group that helps SAGE within the Department of Immunization, Vaccines, and Biologicals, especially Dr. Joachim Gombach and his team, who lead the Secretariat for SAGE, who are the ones that enable us to be able to do these type of things that we hope are for the benefit of everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Cravioto. And I fully endorse the people you have appreciated. And thank you also to all SAGE members for your work and advice. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dan Worth, the chair of MPAG. Dr. Worth, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. We all know that progress toward malaria elimination in Africa has stalled, and the RTSS vaccine recommended today gives us a new tool in our fight against malaria. It will be used with existing tools to enhance the impact on disease burden. Important is that a vaccine is a completely different mode of action than the existing tools for vector control, diagnosis, and treatment. A vaccine recruits the human immune system to fight the parasites as soon as they enter the body. A vaccinated person is poised to fight off the infection at its earliest stage. This is the first ever vaccine for a human parasite and demonstrates that a vaccine is possible for this challenging infection. While ongoing threats to our existing tools, drug-resistant parasites, insecticide-resistant mosquitoes, innovation is needed not only to create new tools, but to better tailor our current tools to achieve maximum impact. The malaria parasite is a formidable foe, and while we are excited by this recent development, major battles remain. I join with Dr. Tedros and Dr. Moiety in thanking those who took the bold decision to introduce the vaccine in their communities with the hope of changing not only their lives, but the lives of their fellow humans afflicted with this disease. This vaccine, as we've heard, has now been given to over 800,000 children in Africa. This is the largest evaluation of any intervention for malaria and probably one of the largest undertakings for any disease. Our hats are off to WHO for their leadership. I would also like to recognize the nearly 50 years of research that led us to this achievement. We stand on the shoulders of giants like Dr. Ruth Nussenzweig, who discovered the vaccine, and the cadre of scientists from around the world, with an emphasis of scientists in Africa, in academia, government, industry, NGOs, and communities who carried this vaccine through its various phases of development. We can already see the next phase. New uses for the RTSS vaccine are already being discovered, improved versions are in the pipeline, and new innovation in vaccine is on the horizon. Today is an inspiration, a major scientific achievement with huge implications for improving human health. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ward, and thank you to all members of MPAG for your efforts. The recommendation for wide use of this vaccine is a triumph for public health, but it's also a triumph for science. My deep thanks and congratulations once again to everyone who has made this possible. Carla, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros, and thanks to all of our speakers for your inspiring remarks on this historic day with this historic announcement. I'd like to now start the Q&A section of this briefing. And if I could just remind you, journalists online, to unmute yourself. I'd like to first call on Simon Ateba, Today News Africa. Could you please unmute and go ahead?
Thank you for taking my question. This is Simon Ateba with Today News Africa in Washington, D.C. For those of us who grew up in Africa, we never knew that there could be a malaria vaccine. So this is almost like the biggest news for Africans this year. I guess my question is, how long will it take for everyone in Africa to get access to the malaria vaccine? How long does it last? So how long does it protect against infection? How much money is needed for everyone to have access to it in Africa? And whether you are getting any support from the Biden administration. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Simon. And I will hand over to Dr. Pedro Alonso, Director of GMP, to answer.
Well, thank you for the question. And in normal circumstances, I would probably take sort of half an hour or 45 minutes to answer this one. But the brief answer to all the very good questions are the vaccine duration of protection is sufficient to cover the most at-risk period for children of getting severe disease and dying. How long will it be? How long will it take to scale it up? Well, recalling what Dr. Tedros, Director General, said, already 800,000 children have received it, and a lot more are on their way to receiving it. However, the next few months will be critical in terms of defining the financing mechanisms to ensure that with the current production capacity, all those children that can benefit do benefit from this vaccine. The financial resources will be required, and it is a great opportunity to show that success in having a new malaria vaccine is also a great opportunity for global solidarity, generating further resources to ensure that all African children that can and should benefit from this vaccine do get this vaccine in the hopefully not too distant future.
Thanks very much, Dr. Alonso, and Dr. Catherine O'Brien would like to add. Go ahead, Kate.
I just want to add a couple of things. I think the issues that you're really driving at, Simon, are issues of equity. What I think we've seen is that there will be decisions made through the Gavi board coming up by the end of the year. And there's already a great partnership between GSK, who is the manufacturer of the vaccine, then tech transfer, along with investors from other sectors, MedAccess in particular. And so these questions of exactly how it will be financed, what the cost per dose, these are still issues that are out in front of us. But as we've seen from the COVID vaccine, where there is political will, there is funding available to assure that vaccines are scaled to the degree that they're needed. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Damien Columbe from Le Quotidien du Médecin. If you're online, Damien, could you please unmute? Okay, I'm going to read Damien's question. I'll read it out and speakers can answer. Sooner this year, we had some interesting results concerning the circumsporozoite protein-based R21 vaccine. Is the SAGE already working on the integration of this vaccine into the WHO guideline? Perhaps Dr. Alejandro Craviato, you could address this.
SAGE normally looks at vaccines once they are in the final stage of testing, and sometimes in parallel to the whole regulatory process for approval, as we have done with the COVID vaccines in a very accelerated way. So we are aware of the other vaccines, but that is through the Product Development Advisory Group that the department also has, that looks at the pipeline. And then they are the ones who follow the development of these vaccines and when SAGE should be made aware of them, so that we can work together in the sense of knowing what the date is coming up and when we can make recommendations. But for us to make a formal recommendation, we would really need to look at what is the evidence coming up from the phase 3 trials mostly, and then going back to the phase 1 and 2 to look at the whole evidence and then be able to make a recommendation for use.
Thanks very much for that explanation on procedure. Let's go to Professor Diane Worth to add to that, please.
Great, thank you. Yes, just to say that we hope that in fact this recommendation today actually enhances the development of other vaccines. The R21 vaccine you refer to is the same antigen that is in the same molecule that's in RTSS, but in a new formulation. And so it's a second generation of the same vaccine, but we also hope there will be more vaccines targeting more parts of the parasite life cycle. This is a complex disease, and we're going to need more work on it.
Thanks very much to both of you. I'd like to now go to Carmen Pone at Political. Carmen, could you please unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. I wanted to get a bit more details on the side effects. We heard that the ones that came up in the clinical trials have been resolved and they don't seem to pose any reason for concern. But can we get more details on that? What are the side effects that you found after after vaccinated 800,000 children? And can you give us a bit more details about how many doses the vaccine is in and at what intervals they are given? Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. First, we'll go to Dr. Kate O'Brien and then to Professor Diane Worth. Go ahead, please.
So one of the reasons that the implementation program was initiated was that during the clinical trials that were conducted, the safety surveillance identified that there were 3 signals, is what we refer to, And the signals were that a concern around children getting meningitis, cerebral malaria, and the balance of possible increase in deaths among girls. This was assessed by the Safety Committee during the clinical trials to be a chance finding, but they were serious enough that they needed to be evaluated before really rolling out the vaccine in a routine way across a large number of countries. And what the implementation evaluation has shown in a very rigorous way is that none of these signals were seen in the evaluation now of 800,000 children who have been vaccinated. So this really brings to a close any concern around those three signals. But this is a vaccine that, like all vaccines, does have some level of mild side effects. In addition to the mild side effects, children do develop some fever associated with the vaccine. Some children do. And so there is a low risk of having a short period, a short event of convulsions associated with fever. So children who have high fevers, some of them will develop self-resolving convulsions. You asked also about the interval and the dosing for this vaccine. So we've seen, just to summarize then, on the safety profile, a very good safety profile. I think we've resolved any of the concerns or the signals from the clinical trial. This is a vaccine that is a 4-dose vaccine. However, the need for that 4th dose is still under full evaluation, and we will continue to watch the data to assess the degree to which that 4th dose is providing a degree of impact that would demand continuing to get the 4th dose. And it is in a 3-dose schedule that is separated 1 month apart. There is some flexibility around how those doses can be given. And so country programs have a lot of flexibility around exactly what ages at which they want to incorporate the vaccine, starting at 5 months of age. And the 4th dose would be around 18 months of age. So a 5, 6, 7 schedule or something in that range.
Okay, let's go to the next question from John Zarakostas for France 24. Go ahead, John, and unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me there?
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if you could elaborate what is the efficacy of the vaccine. A few years ago, I think they were mentioning 40%. Is it more than 50% now? What is the level of efficacy? Thank you.
Okay, we'll call on Dr. Pedro Alonso to answer. Go ahead, sir.
John, thanks so much for your question. The results you probably recall are from the phase 3 trial. That's a rigorous clinical trial. And what we are looking at right now is what we call effectiveness, that is the impact of the vaccine when deployed through routine immunization services. What the committees have seen is that, consistent with the phase 3 trials, areas where the vaccine has been deployed have reduced the admission to hospital of children with severe malaria. And when we talk of severe malaria, we're talking of a very severe condition that is associated with a high risk of dying. So in this case, a 30% reduction of admission with severe malaria is a very significant impact, given the magnitude of the burden associated with malaria.
Thanks very much, Dr. Alonso. Next, we have Helen Branswell online. Helen, could you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hi, thanks very much for taking my question. I wanted to follow up on Dr. O'Brien's comment about the 4th dose. I know that the pilot program hasn't been underway that long, but are you starting to see anything that would signal that perhaps a 4th dose is not needed? Thank you.
You know, Helen, we really do need to wait for a continued observation period to really fully assess this. The results from the phase 3 trial initially indicated that the 4th dose was an important dose to receive, and further evidence that has come from that phase 3 trial and reanalysis gives us some expectation that the major part of the effect is in the first 3 doses. And so just like with other vaccines that we've been talking about, we always want to be sure that we're advising on the number of doses that will achieve the best impact, and no more than that. So really we need to wait for the remainder of the evidence to come through so that we can provide adjustments to the current recommendations as we get more certainty and clarity on some of those uncertainties. At this point, the recommendation is for a 4-dose regimen, as was evidenced through the clinical trial. And again, the implementation program will be continuing to address in part this specific question. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate. Next, we have Anne Gulland from The Telegraph. Anne, please unmute and go ahead.
Oh, hi there. Thanks very much for taking my question. I wondered what the WHO's initial goal was for the effectiveness of a vaccine. I know with COVID, I think you wanted 50% effectiveness. Was it the same for malaria, or was it lower? And if this vaccine is lower than your initial goal, why are you wanting to approve it? Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Dr. Alonso to answer.
Our goal as WHO, and I believe as the broader immunization and malaria community, is to have a 95% efficacious vaccine, a tool that would actually allow us to foresee a world free of malaria. However, as Professor Diane Worth mentioned earlier in the call, we're confronted with an extraordinarily complex organism. It's an eukaryote, it's a parasitic disease, and this is orders of magnitude more complex in terms of the biology of the causative organism. And so I don't think we are within reach of a highly efficacious vaccine yet, but what we have right now is a vaccine that can be deployed, that it's accepted, that it's safe, and that can have a massive impact in terms of lives saved and episodes of malaria averted, even if it is only, in inverted commas, 30%. Now that 30%, given the magnitude of what malaria represents, is probably one of the most impactful vaccines that one could actually use in Africa right now. So we aim for much higher, but what we have right now can already make a huge difference for children in Africa.
Thanks very much, Dr. Alonso. Professor Worth, please go ahead. You'd like to add something.
Yes, I want to reinforce what Pedro said, and I think, you know, we'd all like a magic bullet that completely cured the disease and was given once in your lifetime. But this is a very complex disease that has evolved mechanisms to evade the normal immune system, which controls infectious organisms. And so I think that we should recognize the challenge and the relative success. Depending on how you give this vaccine, if you look through the phase 2 trials, you can get much higher efficacy by actually targeting when you give the vaccine relative to transmission. But is that actually implementable in a worldwide, in a large-scale way? And so I think this is one of those situations where we have a tool, it's demonstrated through both the clinical trial and now through the implementation trials to have a measurable and significant impact, and that's the reason we're approving it. We're not saying this is the end, and in fact, I'm hoping this is the beginning, a renaissance of vaccine development in the malaria field. I think the fact that now we have an approved vaccine means it may actually spur the field to use some of the great new innovations in vaccines that have occurred since this vaccine was first developed over 30 years ago.
Thanks very much, Professor Worth. Dr. Kate O'Brien would like to supplement.
I'd just like to draw the analogy to other life-saving vaccines that have been authorized and recommended for use. When you have first of all, we do hear the term of a modestly efficacious vaccine, and frankly, there are no vaccines that we have that are completely efficacious. So every vaccine we have has some degree of modest efficacy. But I think the most important point is that a % reduction in a very common and severe outcome is a very significant reduction in the rate of that outcome. And what it also means is that there's still work to be done to improve on the vaccine and for layering of the interventions. That such an important point here is that this is not about a vaccine replacing the tools that are already out there. It's about supplementing what's already out there, because there's no intervention for malaria that is highly efficacious in its use across all settings. For the malaria situation, it's really about layering on tools to get as high impact as is possible to protect the lives of children. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. O'Brien. And since we're talking about the R&D aspects of vaccine development, wondered if Dr. Soumya Swaminathan would like to supplement, WHO's chief scientist. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And again, I would like to congratulate all the partners who've been involved in this very long journey. GSK, who did a lot of the work and continue to work with the WHO and the other partners, Gavi, Unitaid, Global Fund, Gates Foundation. I think it just shows that you need partnerships. You need public and private sector philanthropy sometimes, but then you also need the researchers in the countries, you need the trial participants or the research participants. So it's research, especially on complex things like vaccines, is not simple, and you heard it's taken 30 years to get here. What we do have now is a couple of things. One is we have new technologies like the mRNA platform that clearly has proved that it can work. It's safe and efficacious, as we've seen with COVID. And we're already working with companies to develop, to start the process of development of mRNA vaccines for TB and malaria and other diseases. So it gives us hope that we can use new platforms, but building on the experience that we have about diseases like malaria and the antigens that we know now work, can take it forward. And again, it's a process where we've started this development program, which involves experts, involves private sector and academics, to develop a roadmap or a pathway for development of a new vaccine for TB, for example, using a new platform. What would the development process look like? We don't want to take 30 years. We want it to be done much faster, but that can only be done if you lay out in advance the benchmarks, the target product profiles, what clinical trial, what endpoints we should be looking at, what regulatory agencies should be looking for, and at the same time also planning for scale-up of vaccines, looking for manufacturers, trying to build capacity, as we're doing now in South Africa with the first mRNA technology transfer hub. South Africa is also, the company BioVac is also working with BioNTech to develop the mRNA vaccines. And we really look forward to developing those manufacturing capacities, R&D capacities, and the whole ecosystem in Africa, so that vaccines for diseases for Africa are manufactured and made and developed from scratch in Africa in the future. And we hope to continue these very productive partnerships that we have had so far. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swaminathan. I think we will wrap up fairly soon, but we do have a question from Jason Beaubien from NPR. If you could unmute yourself, Jason, and ask your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could just be more specific on what number you guys are using for the efficacy of this vaccine. I mean, Dr. Alonso said 30% in terms of preventing severe cases and hospitalizations. I'm seeing 40% in terms of stopping malaria infections. What is the number you guys are working with in terms of the efficacy that you are seeing with this vaccine?
Thanks so much for that question, Jason. And I'll turn to Dr. Mary Hamill for an answer. Go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks for that question. So in the large phase 3 trials that were completed in 2014, the efficacy was 40%, so a 40% reduction in clinical malaria and a 30% reduction in severe malaria. And as Dr. O'Brien stated, because children have malaria cases many, many times in a year, and every time that they have a case of malaria, they're at risk of severe malaria and death. At this level of efficacy, the impact could be quite high. And in fact, even in the phase 3 trial, we saw that among children who were followed for 4 years, there were thousands of cases of malaria prevented per 1,000 children vaccinated.
Thanks very much, Dr. Hamill. We have a question that was written in the chat, quite interesting, about the economic impact of this breakthrough recommendation. It's from Marina Zapf from German Business Magazine. So she asks, is anybody in the room able to comment on the economic impact of this breakthrough recommendation? Pedro Alonso, would you like to?
We don't have a figure. What we can tell you is what malaria represents in the continent. And the estimated cost, and this is probably a slightly outdated figure, but the estimated cost of malaria in sub-Saharan Africa is over $12 billion per year, and a substantial loss in growth. So tools that help us tackle malaria, improve the way we can control the disease, have a massive impact on economic development and on health. So an exact figure of this vaccine and the impact, we haven't worked that out, but the impact of malaria in the continent is massive.
Thanks very much, Dr. Alonso, for that answer. Aaron Ross from Thomson Reuters. Could you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much. In 2015, GSK had said that there must be a separate determination by the WHO in addition to the recommendation for widespread use that would guide African nations' procurement deals. When will this determination be announced, and how many steps are there before that's made?
I'm not sure we totally understand your question. Could you just rephrase it, repeat it, so that we can direct it to the right expert in the room? Thanks.
Sure. Our understanding is that in 2015, GSK had said that after WHO makes a recommendation for widespread use, that there would be a separate determination that would be used to make determinations about procurement for the vaccine. Do you have any idea when any such determination would be made?
I'll turn over to Dr. Kate O'Brien.
So thank you for that question. And I think what you're referring to is that in 2015, when WHO made a recommendation for the implementation program, this was a vaccine that was authorized for use by the European Medicines Agency. And there was no broad recommendation for use at that time. As we're all clear, the implementation program needed to go forward. What was also understood at that time is that having a recommendation for policy would not itself be the mechanism through which funding for the vaccine would take place. That would require a funding decision, presumably by Gavi, to assure that there were the resources available to procure the vaccine. And so, as I mentioned, that decision will go to the Gavi board at the beginning of December for a deliberation about investment in this vaccine. having now achieved a policy recommendation from WHO. So that step of investment is still a step that we're looking forward to.
Thanks very much, Dr. O'Brien. This is going to be our last question, and then I'll turn to a couple of our experts to see if they have any final comments. So I'd like to turn to Sarah Jerving from DevEx. Sarah, please unmute and go ahead.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. So you spoke about the potential for local production. Do you have certain countries in mind for production? And are there currently any production constraints that could prevent a widespread scale up kind of in the coming year? And what challenges do you foresee in country rollouts?
Turning to Dr. Kate O'Brien. Go ahead.
So GSK was clear at the time as we've proceeded with this vaccine that having provided a large degree of development funding and producing the vaccine for the implementation program and a commitment to continue producing the vaccine for a period of time, was nevertheless seeking a tech transfer partner for the long-term production of this vaccine. There was a program opened up to initiate interest from vaccine manufacturers, and the partner who will be with GSK for this tech transfer is Bharat Biotech in India. So this will be at the outset the site of manufacturing. Over a period of years, this transfer of the technology will take place. And as Professor Worth mentioned, what we're really looking for is a healthy market for malaria vaccines. This is a breakthrough. It is historic. It is the first. But we don't expect that this will be the only vaccine. And really, what the interest is in having a market that provides vaccines with supply security, and we will certainly be looking for additional vaccines and additional manufacturing of the vaccines to assure that there's sufficient doses for all of the sites and countries and children who require the vaccine, whether that's this vaccine or next generation vaccines, and where that manufacturing will take place. Really, the focus is on advancing the manufacturing on the African continent. We've seen that with COVID vaccine and, in fact, a sight line for many more vaccines to be manufactured on the continent for the populations in Africa.
Thanks very much, Dr. O'Brien. We have a couple of experts in the room. I'd just like to ask them if they have any final any final comments before turning back to Dr. Tedros. We have Dr. Susanna Jakob in the room and Dr. David Schellenberg. So, David Schellenberg.
Thank you. Just maybe to say, David Schellenberg from the Global Malaria Programme. I'm the science advisor there. And we've already heard that this is a historic moment, a milestone for malaria control, about the long time that it's taken to get to this point. I just would like to emphasize that, a cornerstone of malaria control is vector control, development of insecticides and new insecticide-treated mosquito nets to prevent malaria. And we celebrate every time there's a development in vector control. That's great. Likewise with drugs for prevention of malaria, drugs for treatment of malaria. Innovations in the development of drugs for malaria are really important. Likewise for diagnostics. But this opens up a whole new avenue for malaria control. The availability of a vaccine now recommended by WHO. That we heard about R21 and other malaria vaccines that are in development, and we are very supportive of the continued development and investment to develop new vaccines. But we have to temper our optimism and enthusiasm for the next generation vaccines by recognizing that there are all sorts of pitfalls along the development path. And it falls to us to really make the best use of the tools that we've got available in our hands now. And I think today's recommendation paves the way for such impact. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Schellenberg. And thanks to all the journalists online for your really interesting questions today. We will wrap up this press conference now. And a big thanks to all of our speakers today, and also to our interpreters who helped with this press conference with different languages. And just a reminder that we have sent already the press release related to this news. Journalists should have received that, and you will also receive any post-presser links that we have. And always, if you have further questions or might want to arrange one-on-one interviews, please get in touch with Media Inquiries with an I at who.int. So with that, I'll hand the floor now back to Dr. Tedros for his final remarks. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carla. I think, as we have said earlier, today is a very historic day. And because it's not only this vaccine is just for malaria, this is not first vaccine just for malaria, but it's also the first vaccine for any parasitic disease. So it will open up opportunities for other diseases as well, in the control of other diseases as well. So that's what I would like to underline. And then the second is in terms of, next steps. I think many were interested on how we would scale up intervention and make use of this new tool. And as you may guess, we will move into massive mobilization because we will need resources. And if we're going to, increase access to this new tool, then we will need increased production of the vaccine, and that means we will need resources. And as what Soumya said, I hope the partnership and cooperation will continue to avail the resources so that, children in Africa and in other parts of the world can have access to this vaccine. Having a vaccine is an important milestone, but the key is having that vaccine in use and, creating access to as many children as possible. So that will be the major challenge now, as you have already guessed, and we will do everything to make sure that we have resources to deliver this vaccine to those who needs it. So once again, I would like to thank our co-chairs, Professor Diane Worth. By the way, she's my mentor, and I'm glad to be today on her side, both from Malaria and also my good friend and brother, Dr. Alejandro Cravioto, and also all who have been involved in this work, all our partners, all our colleagues from WHO and other institutions. And also to the media, thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to having you tomorrow when we launch the COVID vaccine strategy with Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Thank you.